again. This is a bit of a continuation from the previous video I had, which was about Carmelo Anthony and so just the stats about him as a player, about how the team performs when he is off the court compared to on, and whether he's actually providing much benefit to the team. And this sort of also ties into whether he's overrated, underrated, one of the two, I guess, or is he properly rated? One thing that you will see is that it might be a little bit surprising. But now this has got the regular stats of what I looked at last time. I'll just explain it again somewhat briefly, and then I'll move through to the postseason stats. So first up, we'll go to the regular season. My first video had it looking a little bit ugly, so I've tidied it up a little bit. The cells in the orange columns are values that I've populated myself. The ones in the yellow columns are calculated based on what is populated in the orange. And just to explain what is pretty much going on, all it is looking at the total possessions that the team had throughout a season, then looking at the ratings that the team would have had, offensive rating, defensive rating per 100 possessions, which is how many points they've scored and how many they've conceded per 100 possessions. Pace is possessions per game, so 100 possessions is normally a little bit more than one game, because it's slightly under 100 possessions in a game. So what we're doing, we're looking at the individual offensive and defensive ratings of Carmelo, the player, having a look at it compared to the team, and then looking at how much time Melo was actually on the court and that rating, and then being able to figure out what the rating would have been when he wasn't on the court, and then comparing the on-court and off-court values to see whether he provided benefit or not. In grey, a little bit of extra stuff about this one. He played for both New York and Denver, so it's a little bit different, this one. There's a little bit more, you need to take a little bit more than a grain of salt with this one, because I've tried to sort of mix the two values together, or the two sets of values from the two different clubs, but the thing is we don't know what the pace was whilst he was with the Knicks and when he wasn't with the Knicks, and likewise when he was with Denver and he wasn't with Denver. So yeah, with the pace is not a problem because it's actually the same, but for offensive and defensive ratings it's a little bit hard to properly quantify. I've ended up using a bit of a ratio based on how much time he played for each organization out of the total of how much time they had available. Bit of an interesting tidbit, but he was available for 58 games of New York's, and he could have played a further 28 of Denver's, so he could have actually played 86 games in the season, although he didn't, but he could have. Anyways, as we move on though to the crux of this, these columns here, net per game with Melo, net per game without Melo, net performance with Melo. So this first column here is just saying how the team went with Melo. Green means that they were winning with Melo on the court, so score more than they concede. Red being the opposite, orange being if it's even, like it was in this instance. The next column is the same thing, but just for when Melo's not on the court. So given that Melo is always a starter, this is in relation to the second unit. Now, a big thing that needs to be said is, whilst the net is going to be this first column, take that second column, you can get interesting things happen. So for example, in this instance, in this season here, the last full one that he had with Denver, the team is 0.6 points better per 100 possessions than the opponent with Melo on the court, but it's 3.5 points up without Melo on. So despite it having two greens here, it's actually seen as a negative to have Melo than not, because the team was performing better, 3.5, without him than with him, the 0.6. So that's pretty much what's going on here. And just very quickly, having a look at it all, the green shows how many seasons he was actually a positive. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of his 16 seasons, he was a net positive for his team, whilst he was an 11-time All-Star. And as you can see, a number of times he's an All-Star when he's actually a net negative for his team. Obviously the last couple were probably just because he's relatively famous and is a bit of a legacy pick, like Kobe would have got a few of those also, just being a popular player. Now, we've got a picture to have a look at this also. So there's a picture of that way you're not just looking at numbers, so you can see the scale of how bad he was when he was bad and how good he was when he was good. When he was good, he was really good. This is close to 8 up here, and 7, and 8 and 7 points per 100 possessions is quite sizable. But yeah, nearly 10 down here, and quite a few of them that are worse than 6 or getting close to that 6 points per 100. Obviously, quite a few of them that are reasonably close to parity. As well, though, this can have to do with how strong your bench is. If you have a strong bench, then the team might perform really well compared to other second units. So therefore, it sort of skews the data, or how you interpret the data a little bit. Now, if we go back and have a quick look at postseason, again, we've done exactly the same thing for postseason. I've got a column here that says how many games played by the player and by the team. And as you can see, they're all pretty low. He doesn't play a lot in the playoffs because they didn't last very long in the playoffs. They'd lose in their first series, which is why the team has only played 5 games, 5 games, 5 games, 5 games, 4 games, 6 games, 4 games, 5 games, 6 games. There's only 2 different years when it went longer than one series. When it went 3 different series in 2008, 2009, and when in 2012-13 with the Knicks, they won one series 4-2 and they lost another series 4-2. So when we're taking this into account, again, very small sample sizes, so the results can be a little bit wild. We can see here that, again, because his team's losing a hell of a lot, you're expecting to see a lot of red here, that the team is doing worse is doing bad, worse than its opponents when you've got your starters on the court. But then when it comes to how the second string does compared to the first team, they seem to be doing better almost exclusively. So it could be that a lot of it's dead time, that the starting lineups are getting beaten so badly that the second string of the opposition doesn't need to try that hard. That's a definite possibility, especially with a lot of the series losses were to the Spurs or to Miami Heat when he was with the Knicks. So as a result, they have far stronger starting lineups than they do their second stringers. So that could play a part. And also, any time that you're losing a series 4-1 or 4-0, it's going to be quite pronounced differences. So as much as this is saying that Melo is largely a negative impact on his team, very small sample sizes, so it's hard to take too much of this into account. However, something that I did in the regular season and in this one also, I did the percentage of time on court of Melo, how many minutes he was on the court for, out of the total, and then I've multiplied that number, once I've taken it as a decimal, I've multiplied that by the net performance value of the points per 100 possessions difference of having Melo compared to not having Melo. And that way I've given a weighted average of how much that really counts for. And when we get the average, it ends up being 7.1, which is quite sizable. So the team, on average, in a playoff series, is 7.1 points better without Melo on the court than having him on the court. Now, if we have a look at the same thing for the regular season, well, we can't. It's because I have hidden it, because I wanted to make it that you could see the All-Star compared to his net performance. But now I'll unhide what I had hidden so we can see it. And as we can see here, the average is minus 0.6, which means that every year there's only a very slight difference between Melo's performances, his contributions being positive and being negative for the team. When you take into account how long he's on the court to how much of a negative it is, it's not real big. However, I would probably have expected it to be not a negative impact at all, given that he's an 11-time All-Star. So, yeah, and when I'd made mention to the weighted average, obviously the time spent on court is very indicative of that weighted average. He only played 7.4% of the total minutes that the Houston Rockets played, so as much as he was a very big negative, it only ended up being a minus 0.5. It makes a very small difference to the large scale of things. Now, last little things we look at. So that is the regular season. Here is the postseason. As you can see, largely negative, but his team's often losing, so this is to be expected. And the last thing I want to show is that weighted net performance per 100 possessions in comparison to his age, just to see how he's gone over time. As we can see, he obviously didn't start real great, but that happens when you're 19, 20 years old. He had one season where he's a net positive, and then a number of them where he's a negative. That's 5 in a row. And this is, in his early-ish 20s, when he's probably near his athletic peak. When your athleticism and your smarts, I guess, are at the perfect mix, probably around here, late 20s, I guess that's when he performed the best. And unsurprisingly, now in his late 30s, he's going down again. So it doesn't bode particularly well, and I think it largely paints the picture that Carmelo is not an effective NBA basketball player, and for much of his career, from what I'm seeing, I wouldn't deem him to be an above average player. However, I do want to compare what I've found with players such as Iguodala, John Wall, or even some of his teammates that he had at the Knicks or at Denver, to get a better idea of where he is compared to his competitors. But from what I've seen, it doesn't look particularly good for Melo at the moment.